A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom. All praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashem El Shai, Bashem Kakodash, double honors to the apostles and elders, great millstone, teachers of truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquat. Let me listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick lesson. Lord's will, as always, that this lesson is edifying to you. This story I want to read today is because we were speaking in regards to the pride and at camp yesterday. We were speaking just a little bit on that subject, and I kind of just wanted to read through a story of one of the kings within our history. And Lord's will is always, that these lessons and this lesson, of course, is edifying. Right, so this is I want to start off here because these stories are very, very enriched with understanding, right? Gives us a blueprint on some of the mistakes that certain people have made and certain things you can even apply, for our walk as well, right? So this is Romans chapter 15, verse 4, and it says, whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the scriptures, might have hope, right? This is the purpose of going through these things, is to get understanding of, certain situations, and understanding that, in these times, in this society, for example, it is a society that's very engulfed in pride. And that's one of the things I would say is one of the things the Lord hates, right? So I wanted to read through this story here in regards to one of the kings. This is in regards to King Uzziah. He's also known as Azariah, I believe, in the Kings in the second book of Kings 15, right? But I want to read it in Chronicles because it kind of gives you a little bit more detail of his reign, right? So this is Second Chronicles chapter 26, verse 1, and I want to read down, right? And it says in the AMP, it says, then all the people of Judah took Uzziah, who was 16 years old, and made him king in place of his father Amaziah, right? So I'm just reading in the Amplified Version, right? And it says, and he built Eloth and restored it to Judah after the king Amaziah slept with his fathers. And King Uzziah was 16 years old when he became king and reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jechaliah of Jerusalem. And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. So he was essentially one of the examples of a righteous king, right? And that wasn't many examples of this. But just to show you being righteous and still at the same time, it shows you, as we'll get later on in the story, one of the things that led to his downfall, right? So it says, and he continued to seek the Lord, Yahweh Bashem Shai, in the days of Zechariah, who had understanding through the vision of the Most High, as long as he sought, inquired thereof, longing for the Lord, the Most High made him to prosper. So this is good. He sought the prophets, just to also get understanding, and that's a good thing because with a lot of our people, they normally turn to idols to try and get questions and answers to their understanding. Like for example, like King Saul, for example, he was one of the examples. When you go through his story, he sought a woman of a familiar spirit. I think she was like a witch or a wizard or something, a witch, right? To try and get counsel to bring, and this is after Samuel had passed away. So this is verse 6, right? So just to show you the contrast between, Uzziah and other examples of different kings, right? This is verse 6, and it says, and he went out and made war against the Philistines and broke the wall of Gath, the wall of Jabneh, the wall of Ashdod, and he built cities near Ashdod and elsewhere among the Philistines. And the Most High helped him against the Philistines and against the Arabs who lived in Gerbal, and the Menuites. And Ammonites paid tribute to Uzziah, and fame spread abroad. Even as far as the border of Egypt, he became very strong. Uzziah built towers in Jerusalem at the corner gate and the valley gate and the corner buttress of the wall, and fortified them. And he built towers in the wilderness and dug many cisterns, for he had a great deal of livestock, both in the lowlands and in the plain. And he also had farmers and wine dressers in the hill country and fertile fields, for he loved the soil, right? So I think in the KJV it says he was a lover of husbandry. So it shows you also, the Lord, he gave him understanding of how to, do certain things. He was a little bit more well-rounded. He was a little bit more what's it called, upright. And this is it just kind of just gives you more detail and showing you his prosperity portion, right? So he was doing really well, and in moments, in doing very well, you know our people will get very, very comfortable and start to forsake certain behaviors, right? That's why sometimes tribulation is kind of like a necessary evil. Balances, I should say, is like going through tribulation is like a necessary evil, right? Because you, like in Proverbs it says, when you talk about um you know I know how to be essentially full and hungry, lest I deny thee, to roughly paraphrase, right? When you're doing good all the time, then our people tend to forget that the Most High, basically. So where was I? Okay, this is verse 11. Moreover, Uzziah had an army ready to battle, which went into combat by divisions according to the number of their muster, as recorded by Jael, scribe, Messiah, the official, under the direction of Hananiah, one of the king's commanders. The total number of the heads of the fathers' households of valiant men was 2,600. Under the command of that army, 307,500 could wage war with great power to help the king against the enemy. Moreover, Uzziah prepared shields, spears, helmets, body armor, bows, sling stones for the entire army. In Jerusalem, he made machines of war, invented by skillful men, to be put on the towers, on the corner, battlements for the purpose of shooting arrows and large stones. And his fame spread far, for he was marvelously helped until he was strong, right? So, showing you this is, even though he had a long time to rule, it's kind of giving you an abridged version of his rulership. And this is the type of vibration that came about under his rulership. And the scriptures kind of goes into that, the importance of a wise king, right? So let me go to okay, this is Sirach chapter 10, verse 1, and it says, a wise judge will instruct his people, and the government of a prudent man is well ordered. As the judge of the people is himself, and so are his officers. So you saw the kind of mindset was pushing forth, when his mind was in tune to Yahweh Bashim Shai, right? His mind wasn't in tune to the vibrations of other gods. Because what all these other things and these other gods do, they require different practices. And a lot of these practices causes the people to go against the Lord, right? So he had proper instruction. That's what's been very, very important for a lot of these kings. And this is the same thing that's important for us too, because it's the same vibration. When you look at a lot of our people's ways, they get bad instruction, from all these different philosophies that causes them to do and err and so on and so forth. In the Corinthians, in the Apostle Paul, one of the things he said is that I've espoused you to one husband that you may be pure, right? And that's the mindset for the Israelite man, because his mind is not supposed to be contaminated with other different philosophies. His mind is not supposed to be sophisticated. When you look into the word sophisticated, it means to be adulterated. It becomes impure. When you hear that word, the common mindset is that, okay, somebody's sophisticated. It sounds like a good thing, but it's actually not a good thing. when you really think about it, your mind is actually tainted when your mind is sophisticated. Our minds as Israelite men is supposed to be pure, focused on one power, Yahweh Bashem Shai, and none else, right? Not these other philosophies, not these other gods, because what comes with these other vibrations of these different gods is different wicked, abominable works, right? So, where was I? Okay, so this is where it starts to get a little bit juicy, right? So this is going into his pride. So here it says the pride of Uzziah's undoing. So it says, but when Uzziah became strong, he became so proud of himself and his accomplishments, right? That's another thing too. You have his accomplishments. As a matter of fact, okay, let me read this and I'll get a precept. And it says, and he acted corruptly as he was unfaithful and sinned against the Lord his power, for he went into the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Right? So let me just get a quick precept in regards to that. Psalms. Actually, let me go back to that last chapter. This is I'm sorry. This is Sirach chapter 10, verse 12, and it says the beginning of one's pride is when one departeth from the Most High, and his heart is turned away from his Maker. Pride is the beginning of sin, and he hath put it shall pour out abomination. Therefore the Lord brought upon them strange calamities and overthrew them utterly. So this is, you're starting to see the unfolding of King Uzziah's his pride, right? His heart started to depart, from the ways of the Lord. This is verse 17, and it says, and Azariah the priest and went after him, and with him 80 priests of the Lord, men of courage. They opposed King Uzziah, said unto him, saying, it is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests. And it's true. That's not a role for you, right? But seeing his accomplishments, thinking it was him, he got essentially ahead of himself, right? And you can imagine the type of riches that he had, the different accomplishments. You've won different wars, so everything. You just put yourself in his position, like you're doing good, you're excelling, on the war front, your men, they have the ability to perform different because if you read it in the KJV, I believe he had men of cunning knowledge, it says, where they're able to create all these different weapons. So he had a lot of knowledge in regards to weaponry, and you're doing very well. You're seeking the prophet to get understanding of the Lord, and the Lord gives you success essentially, and then you have all these different heathen nations paying you tribute, right? And fame too, because I literally just read that, in regards to fame. So you can imagine all these different accomplishments, coming from all these different, avenues, is making him feel, a little like, I'm that guy. I'm that guy, right? So this is where he starts to kind of go off, the handle. So it says, I'll read verse 18 again, and it says, and they opposed King Uzziah and said to him, it is not for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord, but for the priests, the sons of Aaron, who have been consecrated to burn incense, right? So that's essentially a priestly duty, right? When we were in the wilderness during the time of Korah's rebellion, it was he what was his name, Aaron, had to burn incense to make an atonement, right? So that wasn't a role for the king, that's a role for the priests, right? So this is verse, where was I? And it said, okay, so continuing on, it says, get out of the sanctuary. This is the priest speaking. For you have been unfaithful, and you have no honor from the Lord your power. Then Uzziah, with the censer in his hand to burn incense, was enraged. While he was enraged with the priest, leprosy broke out from on his forehead before the priests in the house of the Lord, beside the incense altar. And Azariah the chief priest and all the priests looked towards him. Behold, he was leprous on his forehead. So the Lord plagued him and hurried him out of there. And I'm sorry, to get out because the Lord had stricken him, right? So the Lord was on the side of the priests, right? He was doing too much. He was going too far, right? But you see the type of like, and this wasn't like, even though I'm reading this in the chapter, this wasn't like in the span of a day, right? He reigned for 50, I think it said 52 years. So you can imagine how much he was built up by all this different fame, these different accomplishments, your citizens, the people work, the men working under you, your craftsmen, your men that are skilled in weaponry, they're doing very well, you're prospering all the time. Like that was a long time for accomplishments to build up, but nothing really essentially humbled him, right? Until he began to do something that wasn't for him, he wasn't consecrated for him to do, right? So, Romans, even though he was a king, he's still a man, right? This is Romans 12:3, and it says, "For I say, through the grace given unto me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly according as the Most High hath dealt to every man the measure of faith," right? So he's, and then Paul goes into different, bodies and so on and so forth, right? But just to show you also back then, you had men that were doing just, different things, right? Just like in this time, you have men that have different offices, different roles, different duties, different skills, so on and so forth, right? But, he was trying to do it all, right? And that wasn't for him to do, because you weren't a priest, right? So even though he was doing very well in succeeding, seeking the prophets, you know he didn't, he went too far with his pride, right? He got ahead of himself. So I guess I'll read these last three, right? So it says, King Uzziah was a leper to the day of his death. Being a leper, he lived separate in a separate house, excluded from the house of the Lord. And his son Jotham took charge of the king's household, judging and governing the people of the land. Now the rest of the acts of Uzziah, from the first to the last, Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, had written. And Uzziah slept with his fathers and buried him with his fathers in the burial field of kings, outside the royal tombs, for they said, he is a leper. And his son Jotham became king in his place, right? So, that's pretty much the story, because, it showed how, eventually, all that buildup of success, and, he tried to do something, and I was like, nope, this is not for you to do, right? Or at the end of the day, we're still just men, right? And this was a king, right? But it's a humbling thing, right? And it's the same thing, for us to, not for us not to get ahead of ourselves sometimes, because that's one of the things that knowledge does. It puffs you up, right? Having all this knowledge, like, you still there. That's why I think personally, servitude is very, very important, and being subject to another, that mindset of servitude, is so important, because it keeps you grounded. And Yahushua really exemplified and showed that. He was one, I think he said, to roughly paraphrase, I'm among the one, those who serve, to roughly paraphrase, in that mindset. That servitude really helps to, what's it called? Balance, or keep you grounded, I should say. That type of mindset. So, as a matter of fact, I think I'll read that real quick, because I think he was talking to the disciples. I'm among those who serve, if I'm not mistaken. Hold on. Okay, this is Luke 22, verse 26. And ye shall not be so, but he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that doth serve. For which is greater, he that sitteth at meat, or the one who that serveth? It is not he that sitteth at meat, but I am among you as he that serveth, right? So, I think how should I strongly exemplify that mindset of servitude, because, he was giving them an example of how to actually be and carry on themselves towards one another, right? And a good example of that was him actually trying to wash him washing the disciples' feet, right? That's if it don't get more humbling than that, then that's a powerful you know um, example of conduct, right? To ward off these feelings and sentiments of pride and so on and so forth, right? Because that's one of the things with knowledge, it really does puff up, right? So, anyways, just be mindful of these things, right? And Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.